Self-care to me are these superficial actions that we take to address a pain point in our life. So maybe I'm feeling really stressed out after a long day. So what do? I decide to take a hot bath to relax, or I go on a little bit of a walk, or I'll pick up a book and read it. But the problem is, it's superficial. It's not long lasting because it's not focused on alleviating the problem. It's focused on just fixing the problem. And so tomorrow the problem can come back and I feel stressed again. And now I need to find something to deal with that pain point. That's self-care. Soul care is different. It's deeper. It's long-lasting rhythms. It's getting to the question of, well, why do I feel empty and burnt out all the time? Why am I struggling? It's filling me up with long-lasting rhythms rather than these one-time superficial actions that reset the next day. And I believe that God wants us to practice soul care. And I believe that's true because I believe that Jesus modeled soul care. He was the ultimate at soul care and staying filled so that he could pour out.
How does Jesus model soul care to us?
Jesus honored his capacity. Jesus was fully God, yet fully man. And he knew that he had human capacity and he honored that human capacity. He chose to honor the limitations of his human body and realize his need for filling so that he could pour out in the way that God asked him to. We can't pour out if we're empty. Soul care is based on the 6 rhythms that I believe Jesus practiced to care for his soul, from physical rhythms such as nourish, which focuses on your physical body, all the way to the 6th rhythm, which is tune in, which talks about being aware of your emotions and what's going on underneath the surface of your life. But Jesus was so good at modeling these things. It was such a fun book to write because I got to see Jesus through the lens of soul care. And I've never really looked at the Gospels in that lens. And so many things stuck out to me. I've read the Gospels so many times, but so many new things stuck out to me when I read through the lens of how did Jesus stay filled.
We hear a lot about the fact that Jesus did take the time to get away to the garden, get away into quiet places and pray. We love the scriptures that talk about how he was asleep on the boat, that Jesus had naps and that kind of thing. Is it as simple as those 2 qualities about Jesus, or is there more to the way he lived his life that stood out to you?
I think even the rhythm of nourish was an eye-opener for me to think of Jesus practicing the caring of his body is bizarre. Do you think about Jesus thinking, oh, I should hydrate, or, oh, it's time to stop and fuel my body? And so should you, disciples. Come and eat some breakfast, He often said, let's go get some food. You go get some food. Go to the town and get some food. Feed these people. Like, he was so aware of physical needs because this temple is all we've got to do what God has called us to do. So we have to stay attuned to our physical needs and meet those needs in healthy ways. Jesus was attuned to the nutrition his body needed. He was in tune to hydration. Drinking water is so underestimated and undervalued in our culture. We neglect our bodies. We don't take a sip of water till the end of the day, and then we're irritable, we're annoyed, we're tired, and we're like, this is spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
When it might not be a demon, you just might be dehydrated, and you need to take care of your physical body. How can we go to Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth when we've neglected to care for our physical body? Not only that, but Jesus practiced movement. There's a whole chapter in soul care under that nourish rhythm about movement and the importance of movement and exercise and what it does for our neurotransmitters. It's like a 20-minute brisk walk is parallel to taking an antidepressant and how it affects your serotonin and dopamine levels. Did you know that Jesus walked about 40,000 steps a day? I mean, that blows my 10,000 step goal
Yeah.
out of the water. 40,000 steps a day. If you just think about the basics, these things, these basic temple things, our human temple that affects our brain health, that affects the rest of our life. There's so many things that are just so basic that Jesus himself honored. How much more do we need to honor our human temple? So there's nourish, there's rest, there's connect, there's protect, which is the rhythm of boundaries. There's the rhythm of savor, which is my favorite, about being in tune to life, being present, being mindful in the here and now. There were so many different rhythms that he practiced in his life, and that's what kept him balanced and calibrated it in a healthy way. And so it's just amazing. And it's just such a reminder that this is not a luxury for us. This is a necessity.
So are there signals then that you would look out for to say, hey, I think you need a little bit of soul care in this? Like maybe you are carrying too much for somebody else. Maybe you are getting in too deep here.
Well, I think one of the reasons that people struggle with soul care to begin with is because of underlying beliefs that make them feel over responsible for people. I think about, the things that we carry from childhood. Maybe you're a firstborn and you're so used to filling in the gaps of responsibility and being a people pleaser. They say behind every people pleaser was once a parent pleaser. And for many firstborn children, that's kind of what you do. You fill in the gaps. You do more than your share. And then you can take that pattern into relationships. Or maybe you grew up in a family where there was a lot of high needs, or one person in the family had high needs that were higher than yours. Maybe there was a child who was rebellious, or maybe there was someone with a disability, or maybe there was chaos and you had to kind of put your needs on the back burner to focus on everybody else's needs and keep equilibrium in the family. Guess what? You might be the type of person who then grows up attracted to problems that need fixing or people who need helping because that's your role that you carried. Some of the reasons we do some of these things in relationships actually stems back from the roles we carried in childhood. So even practicing healthy soul care, the people who struggle the most are the people who are so fixated on everybody else's needs,
Mm.
so out of tune to their own needs, their own health, their own filling. But imagine the detriment when we carry that mentality into relationships and it's so lopsided. It's easy for people like that to get into one-sided relationships where they're doing all the investing, but I'm doing it by myself. If it's a heavy burden, you probably shouldn't be carrying it.
In a dating kind of setting, when you feel like service and care are really important, to set boundaries then in dating, what does that look like when you're wanting to love somebody but also look after yourself?
I do think scripture makes a point to remind us that the romantic relationship is not like the ministry relationship, which is why the Bible tells us to be equally yoked when it comes to romantic relationships versus unequally yoked. We might be unequally yoked in other relationships with people who we're doing ministry with, but when it comes to romantic relationships, the Bible talks about mutuality, mutual submission and equal yoke. I think there's something to be said of that. And for us to look for that in our romantic relationships, because a romantic relationship is never a ministry relationship in the sense of I'm just pouring out,
Mm.
period. That becomes a one sided relationship. And we're supposed to do that with the discipleship relationships that we're called to, but not in every single relationship in our life, or we would be completely drained and depleted. There has to be life-giving relationships, and especially in the context of romantic relationship. In order for a relationship to grow in a romantic context, there has to be healthy give and take.
One of the most annoying things about Jesus, if I can say it, is that he didn't date. Because for those that, are in that season trying to look at Jesus for what to do or some kind of picture of how would he do this, it's not there in a literal sense. So what can we take away from Jesus' life about how to do dating when he never did?
I think it starts with the reality that you can have a full, rich, complete life as a single person. And I'm glad he didn't date because it's a reminder that my purpose and fulfillment does not come from my mate. It comes from my savior. My husband does not fulfill me even in marriage. Like there's still a vertical context with my relationship with God that keeps me filled rather than a horizontal relationship that keeps me filled. I love the idea that a healthy marriage is not a necessity, but it does add to your life. It's a gift and a blessing. And so for us to know that I'm in I'm not in a relationship, but I want to be. There's nothing wrong with that. That you can be just as purposeful and complete and fulfilled as a single person as well. Like there's no deficit in singleness. And I think that's the beauty of Jesus not dating is like, hey, I'm complete standing alone.
Interestingly, I feel like it's the church that can perpetuate the alternative to that, that marriage is the precursor to unlocking your full potential, that marriage is that precursor to some kind of validation. Whereas culturally now, we're getting more to a point where your relationship status can be whatever it wants to be. Like you do your thing. Is the church doing something that is hindering singles right now that you notice the most? Or is that a little bit unfair of me to say?
It's tricky because we can take anything and interpret it to the tone of our level of health. So when I'm struggling and I hear someone say something, that can really be misconstrued. But if I'm healthy and I hear something, that same thing can be a word of encouragement. So the level to which something comes across often has to do with my own health and how I choose to interpret it. So has the church said things that have discouraged singles? Certainly, but I also think it depends on the health of the person doing the interpreting of how they're going to receive that word or disregard that word. What I do know to be true is that God uses both the path of singleness and the path of marriage to make us more like Him. And if I'm on the path of singleness right now, I go full force in that path to become more like Jesus. If I'm in the path of marriage, I go full force to become more like Him through marriage. They're both hard in different ways. They're both a blessing in different ways. And I get to decide which course I want to take. It's a choose your own adventure to a degree. If you want to hold on to the hope of marriage, hold on to it. If you've decided you want to be single, that's great too. It's really up to you which path you want to pursue by doing all that you can do along that journey and trusting God with the parts that are out of your control.
For the person listening who is in a waiting season, they do have that desire to be in a relationship, to be married one day. Where would you say that healthy soul care begins for them?
I would say seeing your job, your role, your responsibility, and being filled standing alone. Because when you're filled standing alone and you get into a relationship, you're already filled. It's like what you can give in that relationship is the overflow versus you're half filled. You get into a relationship and you're really needing them to fill you up, and you find yourself in an unhealthy place. So as a single person, no matter what you desire, no matter what tomorrow holds, you will not be wasting time by getting healthy standing alone, by filling up standing alone, by caring for your soul standing alone. It's not going to be in vain, because if it doesn't pour out into a romantic relationship, it will pour out to all the people in your proximity. They will all benefit from your health and wholeness. And it's also preparing you for if there comes a day when God does bring someone into your life, that you're already functioning out of a place of overflow rather than a place of emptiness.